Alright, so I'm going to go over some of the, I suppose, mission statements, or the mission statement, the goals, the principles of the Illuminati. And I want to do this because before we get into our web search on some of these conspiracy theories surrounding the Illuminati, it might be useful to kind of know what they're all about. And so I want to start by bringing this up, and this comes from the second day of our blend space project, the document that we read on the history of the Illuminati. This is a quote pulled straight from that. And so it says that the primary goal of the Illuminati was of bringing about spiritual and political change. And so keep that in mind. Their goal was to bring about spiritual and political change. I'm going to go into this next slide, and this says that the Illuminati was made up of influential leaders from the top tiers of society who opposed what they considered to be culturally entrenched superstition, prejudice, religious oppression, and political abuse. So I want to bring up the question, does this ring a bell at all to anything that we've learned about in other history classes? This idea of starting a group because you feel politically oppressed, because you want religious freedom, you want freedom from someone. Does that sort of idea ring a bell? Because it rings a bell for me. And I have these two little quick pictures, one being the Sons of Liberty, which is a revolutionary group that was started in America when they were, up against English, the English rule. The revolution was started out of people feeling like they were politically oppressed, right? They felt like the English government shouldn't have a say-so 3,000 miles away on, whether they were being taxed and stuff like that. So you got the Sons of Liberty. That's a group that started because they felt like they were being oppressed. And then you have here below a classic painting from the French Revolution. This is a painting depicting the bourgeoisie class, which is the working class. And they were the ones who started the French Revolution, right? They felt like they were being politically oppressed. They felt like the government wasn't treating them right. And so the French Revolution started. All these groups started because they felt like they were being oppressed. And that sounds kind of like what we were seeing from the ideals of Illuminati. Now I want to ask you this question of what does Illuminatus mean? And I know I've asked you this before, but I want to bring it up again because it means enlightenment, right? It means to be enlightened. It's Latin for that. And so all this stuff that I just showed you, I want you to take into consideration that the Illuminati organization, was started during the Enlightenment period in the late 1700s, right? The Enlightenment period is something we learned about back then, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but it was this time period where people started kind of challenging religion. They started challenging how much control the church had. People wanted to be more logical. They wanted evidence for why things happened. They wanted to explore things. They didn't want to be trapped by the government, right? People were looking to free their minds and things like that. And so think about that. I know we hear all these crazy things about the Illuminati, but if you look into just sort of when and how they started and just their name in general, it doesn't sound too crazy, and they actually sound a lot like some other groups that we've actually talked about and seen throughout our history classes. And so I want to leave off with this last quote that also comes from the document we read. And it says the Order of the Illuminati was made up of free-thinking leaders who sought to instigate a departure from political, cultural norms of the day through an orchestrated web of influence, authority, and action. And so this kind of just puts the nail on the head. The Illuminati was made up of a bunch of free thinking, and that goes back to the whole idea of the Enlightenment period. Free thinking people who sought to pull away from political entrapment and who sought to challenge things. And I know that sounds crazy if you're just talking about one group, but there was all sorts of people doing it at this time. There were all sorts of people who wanted to, who were all about free thinking and who were all about breaking away from political and cultural norms. And like I just showed you, there was the Sons of Liberty, the bourgeoisie from the French Revolutionary War, and even the Illuminati. They're in that same sort of group. And so I want you to really think about that, because it just goes to show how important historical context plays a role in things. The Illuminati doesn't sound so crazy when you look at it like this. But, obviously the Illuminati has evolved into something else. And so what are the Illuminati principles now? And I have quite an extensive list, and I'm not going to go over all of this because it would be boring if I read each and every one of these. But I pulled these 25 so-called principles of the Illuminati from a website, and I looked through a few websites and found these same exact principles, and I don't know how valid they are. I can't prove any of that, but I saw this one too many times and I figured I'd put this up. And if you want to pause this video and sort of look at all these, you'll find that some of them are similar to what we were just talking about, these concepts of breaking away from government and breaking away from cultural norms and political norms and things like that. You'll see that in some of these, but you'll also see that some of them they're pretty extreme. And that just goes to show that the Illuminati we see today and that we hear about today seems to be kind of different, actually very different. Their principles are a lot more extreme. And so, as we go on for the rest of this day, I just want you to think, if the Illuminati still does exist, what are they up to? Because it's one thing to want to break away from, cultural and political norms like the Illuminati was back in the late 1700s, the 1800s, but it's another thing to do some of what you're going to read in these 25 principles. And so I really want you guys to take that into consideration, and I think it'll help you a lot more as